get this presentation underway. So welcome to our Thursday meeting. Today we're going over Log4Shell. Just a couple quick announcements before we really get started. For those of you who aren't aware, we are running applications for 2 executive roles in the club here that will be opening up once the school year is over. That the roles are for secretary and for vice president external. You really don't need any kind of qualifications other than being a current student at MacEwan in order to join. So whether you're in the stream now or you're watching this video later on, feel free to apply. If you have any kind of concerns, like you want to help but you don't really want to do those roles, dude, we're flexible. Like we can work with that. Any kind of contribution to the club is a valid and useful contribution. So, okay, so today Log4Shell. Let's get into it. Another thing too to note is that I will be giving just this 15 to 20 minute presentation, and then our community friend Stead Manticore is going to be giving a somewhat longer presentation on the challenge that he made called Log4Santa, which is a web challenge that requires that you exploit the Log4j vulnerability known as Log4Shell, which we'll talk about. And I'm really excited for what he has to say. So, all right. So what even is it, right? Well, firstly, it's a big deal. It's an exploit of the vulnerability in the Log4j logging utility. We'll get into what that is and why that's important and why it's everywhere. And guess what? It's a 10.0 critical vulnerability. So according to NIST, who's usually in charge of CVEs and that kind of stuff, I think it's NIST. Either way, it doesn't really matter. They all agree that it's 10.0 critical. It allows for arbitrary code execution. You don't need to be on site to exploit it. It can be entirely remote, and it can let you execute any kind of code that you provide, as long as you exploit it properly. And that's huge. That's a huge deal. Just the fact that you can execute anything you want means that a malicious actor can easily go in and exploit the vulnerability and get a root shell and then install malware, get the computer to do whatever they want it to do. And, you know, obviously that's not good for business. So more background. I was going to add another picture here, but I couldn't find one in time. But I included this one. This guy's, his name's John Hammond. He's a popular cybersecurity YouTuber. I just thought this was kind of funny because it's like your classic streamer picture. But what he's doing in this picture is he's exploiting Minecraft with Log4j. Because, fun fact, that's originally where this vulnerability was discovered. So it wasn't him that found it out, but he's just testing it. He's just showing that it's possible through the vulnerable version of Minecraft at the time. But it was initially discovered by the Alibaba cloud security team on November 24th, 2021. They had initially discovered it, I want to say it was through a Minecraft server, so they thought that it was exclusive to Minecraft, so they investigated it further to figure out why Minecraft was vulnerable to it. And then they discovered that it's not Minecraft, but it's actually one of Minecraft's dependencies, which is or maybe not dependencies, but a utility that was embedded within Minecraft called Log4j that was vulnerable to it. And that became a very substantial deal. But essentially, this is crazy because the simplicity of the attack is like anyone could set it up, really. If you just know how to use like a Linux shell, if you just know how to like run commands, you can typically run the Log4Shell exploit. So in this case, he set up his LDAP server, he set up a listener, and then I will get into what those are. And then he ran this command here, which is, you'll see an example of it later on if you can't really see it in this picture. But all he did is just run he just typed this thing into the chat, hit enter, and then he got a listening shell on his listener. And so he was able to get command line access. So whatever privilege this Minecraft server was running on, which sometimes they, depending on however they are configured, they could be running as root or just as user, is the privilege that that shell will get. But from there, a skilled hacker can escalate their privileges and do whatever they want. Okay, so I thought this link was extremely fascinating, so let me pull it up. So this is, if you guys can see that okay, let me know. If you need me to zoom in or something like that, maybe I'll just zoom in a little bit. But so the researchers, it's a Chinese company that was doing the research. They tested it out on a bunch of popular websites. So they logged into Apple. They typed in the attack string on the login field. And in this case, they weren't running a reverse shell through the LDAP. Or it was LDAP, but what they were really intending to do here was do a reverse DNS. So the command that they typed in would direct the Apple Log4j plugin that's within their software here. And then that would go to the malicious LDAP server, download the class, deserialize, execute it, and then in this case, the researchers, they weren't planning on doing anything malicious that we know of. Their code was just intending to do a DNS request to the servers that the Alibaba researchers had set up, and in this case, these are their servers. And then these are two screenshots just put together. But so they typed in the command, hit enter, and then they got DNS requests from Apple servers. That's huge. That's a huge deal. That means that if they didn't put DNS code or whatever in there, they could have gotten root shells on Apple's servers. And in this case, it was 5 different servers. Another one here. So this is iCloud, which is technically another service within Apple's, I don't know what you call it, their cloud or something. Same thing, 4 servers. And then over here, this one is Amazon. So it's the Chinese domain for Amazon. Same idea. They got listeners. And then over here, CEYE, same thing. Cloudflare, they were able to get root shells through Cloudflare, or, reverse requests. Twitter, they were able to exploit Twitter. They were able to exploit Steam. They exploited Tesla. And then this one is Baidu. I think that's Google, or China's version of Google. So crazy stuff, man. They were able to prove that anything running Log4j was vulnerable to this 10.0 security vulnerability. So let's talk about Log4j just a little bit. It's an extremely popular logging utility because of its versatility, because it's open source, it's free. It's virtually every major application and service was using Log4j at that point. As you could tell in the previous example, a whole bunch of major companies were using it, and that's not even the tip of the iceberg of how many companies and how many services out there depend on Log4j for logging. So the Alibaba cloud security, they made Apache. They made Apache aware of it on the sometime after the 24th of November. And then eventually Alibaba leaked the exploit, the vulnerability on their Twitter account, I think. I tried to find the tweet for you guys, but I couldn't find it. So just from what I understand, they leaked it through their Twitter. And then within that day, there were thousands of services being exploited by attackers. And I think within the next few days, there were already utilities written up on GitHub that you could just download for free that would allow you to exploit the vulnerability in whatever way you want. So as you can imagine, chaos ensued. Some major services, and I just don't want to like throw these off the top of my head, but a lot of things went down that day because a lot of things needed to get fixed. So they just took it offline so that they wouldn't get compromised. Another thing about like why it's so severe and it still can be exploited today, because Log4j itself came out with updates. They fixed it. It was kind of a mess at first because of how much they needed it to be fixed, but like the demand for getting it fixed, just based on sheer volume of people who use it. But they did get it fixed. So if you download the latest version of Log4j and you configure it properly, keyword there, then you won't have that problem. But one of the issues is that there's still so many services out there that are running Log4j on previous versions that may not even be aware. They might be aware of the exploit, but they might not be able to update the individual service. So Apache released the patch, which is great, but it's entirely up to the service using Log4j to update their Log4j utility. And so that's the reason why you can still exploit it in the wild. Not everyone's updating. So how does it work, right? You've been told some background. You're probably curious, what the heck is LDAP? What is JNDI? What even is, like, why is this even possible? Well, let's get into that. So there's, oh, this looks kind of ugly. Sorry about that. I'll kind of talk about this a little more, but I am going to post these slides. So this is the manual page for the Log4j message lookup substitution. So in this case, this message lookup substitution is the core functionality that allows this, like the framework or functionality of Log4j that allows for the vulnerability. I mean, this in and of itself can't really be exploited necessarily, like every time. Like you could find a way to, but it could get really complicated. The most vulnerable one, the one used in almost all the exploits, is this one right here, JNDI, LDAP, specifically these two, map and protocol setup like that. So then you get a domain, and I'll get into that a bit more. But essentially, oh wait, I think we'll get this figured out. But so it's embedded in the strings within the in the code. It's a dynamic runtime logging utility. So if something pops up, it gets the Log4j service will run through whatever they have within the Log4j plugin and request the dynamic string. And in the case of this, it uses the JNDI, which is the Java name domain interface, and the LDAP protocol, and then it sends the request out to whatever domains listed, and then from there, you don't need to even put anything there, because whatever the LDAP server has is going to give it a class and a Java class, and then Log4j is going to deserialize that and then attack. So JNDI is it sits within underneath the Java application. It's the Java naming and directory interface. It's just a way for clients to discover and look up data and resources by name. So you don't really need to know what JNDI is to know how to do the attack, but it is important to get familiar with it. So there's multiple protocols available. In this case, we use LDAP. So LDAP is the Lightweight Directory and Access Protocol. It's a protocol for transferring that data across the network, and there's not a whole lot of security in it. So essentially, the attacker sets up their malicious LDAP server, and then they send the JNDI request to the vulnerable server. the vulnerable server passes it to the Log4j utility, which sends that, makes the request off to the LDAP server. The LDAP server redirects it to the malicious class, which gets downloaded and then executed on the vulnerable server. So that's the core of the Log4j attack, and I hope I gave Stedmanticore enough time. But it's his time to shine.
Cool. Let's see if I got this set up ready to go. Can you unshare there, Taylor?
Yep, I'm unshared.
All right.